Pressure, stress. Yeah, I think the body starts to shut down gradually. Well, sometimes less gradually, more abruptly, right? When you reach that point, I find that I'll push myself so far that my body starts to respond. I start to get sick, or I start to get like a niggling pain or injuries start cropping up. Built a business in the UK. It was doing really well. We reached about £300,000 turnover a year. I was finally kind of removing myself, and then the business stopped growing. Every single time I reach a glass ceiling, I've just got to sit there long enough, understand that each ceiling requires a different type of leverage. So you can do everything, but it's not all at once.
Not only have you done it for yourself, your family, the people in your team, all of the kids you've mentored through Warrior Academy, you're now extending that reach even further, not only to the kids in the slums, but also to other people who are potentially in positions where they can also be change makers in their own way.
The hardest thing is prioritizing. And so you go in thinking you're going to solve this problem, right? And very quickly you realize that there are an abundance of severe issues which are vital and you need to solve them.
In a world that glorifies hustle, winning, and relentless ambition, few live it all as intensely and as intentionally as Sebastian Bates, a former professional athlete, a founder, a father, a man who's navigated near-death experiences, built global businesses, and now dedicates his life to serving children in the toughest places on earth. You've seen the warrior, and today we meet the human behind the impact. From martial arts mats to the slums of Kenya, from base jumps to breaking cycles of poverty, from global brand builder to the founder of the Bates Foundation. Sebastian's story is one of pressure, resilience, and radical responsibility. He's not just teaching self-defense, he's defending futures. He's not just scaling profit, he's scaling purpose. We go deeper into the mindset, the mission, and the moments that changed everything. And today, thanks to our sponsor at Meals on Me, who are keeping our listeners well with their flavourful, fulfilling, fuss-free meal delivery service, we go beyond the discipline and the drive to explore the purpose and presence and the powerful ripple effect of one man's choice to lead. This is Sebastian Bates, intentional, impact-driven, and all in.
Seb, we are back from a trip in Kenya, and I have to say, it's not many people I can spend a week with and then come back and see them straight away without wanting a good rest in between. But not only have we just spent a week together, we are also a returning guest to the podcast, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, there's so many reasons to have you back on the show today, but for our listeners that haven't met you yet, if they were to look at your social media, they would see a lot about you being an entrepreneur, philanthropist, a dad. What else do our listeners need to know about you to give some kind of context to our conversation today?
What do people need to know about me to give context about what we're speaking about today? I've got a feeling we're going to be speaking a lot about pressure and handling pressure. So they need to know that I used to be an extreme sports athlete, a professional fighter, and that I've run built multiple 6-7 figure businesses. Perhaps it's useful for people to know that the businesses and the charity I've now got span across 7 countries and 5 continents. So we've got close to 100 staff. And we are very close to, if we're not already, the largest independent, non-franchised youth martial arts academy on the planet. So there's lots of stuff going on, which involves lots of pressure around the whole world, while also raising 3 kids.
So, you got plenty of free time on your hands.
Loads of spare time, yeah.
I think if there's anything that anybody would say about you that's met you, is that you like to fly close to the sun. You're somebody that enjoys the pressure. And that's kind of unique, I think, for most people. A lot of people listening to this show today will be high performers that enjoy pressure, but maybe find themselves getting a bit stuck in it, getting stuck in that stress. And they know they've got so much more to give, but maybe they're just hitting that ceiling and that sticking point. So from your experience, what does stress mean to you?
Really good question. I think first of all, we are all neurologically programmed to handle stress in different ways. I've got ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. I kind of grew up in the era where ADHD was not something you found out about and kind of had a stigma attached to it. Now I've worked with 50,000 kids around the world. It's become very clear to me how ADHD can be a superpower for a lot of people. So someone with ADHD is very, very good in a crisis. They're very good with pressure. They're very good at flying close to the sun. as you said, right? So all of these things mean they're particularly good at implementing and getting stuff done very, very quickly. They typically aren't so good at other things. If they find something boring, they don't stick at it for long. They quickly move on to something else. So for me, handling pressure, moving quickly and dealing with stress means creating leverage in my life, building a team around me, not doing everything myself, having awesome accountability, having people around me who can spot the typical issues I will fall into when I start being in this state of dealing with high pressure. And it's interesting for me because one of my great mentors, Dan Priestley, who you know very well as well, he once said to me, the extremes that you take yourself to can be a double-edged sword. And, don't let your boredom destroy your business. And it's really interesting because, there are times where I'll throw myself into a specific project, get so much done in that project, and then it feels like it's done, but I just need to wait 5 years for it to actually, grow and develop. Then you get bored and you start to do something else, which actually starts to become destructive to the thing you've just done. And so I think that's a common challenge or issue a lot of entrepreneurs face. So it's having accountability to stick to one thing for a long period of time. And then I think this perception around pressure is really important. We work with a lot of families right around the world. And one thing I've noticed is this unhealthy relationship we've got with pressure. We feel like, or society makes us feel like pressure is bad. Yep. We need to bubble wrap kids, prevent them from experiencing pressure, prevent them from experiencing failure. And all this really does is means they grow up without the tools to actually manage pressure. And so adulthood and real life hits them with full force rather than de-escalating and kind of reducing the impact of what that actually feels like. So my point of view is really accountability, learning how to deal with pressure and spotting the signs of burnout way before they actually cause a negative impact in your life.
There's got to be a huge piece of self-awareness attached to that because you seem to know yourself pretty well. Has that always been the case?
I've always asked myself big questions, why I do certain things. I've done a lot of introspective work, and I think having kids has kind of forced me to do that even more because you create these little human beings who, you're kind of, everything you do is going to manifest in how they live their lives, especially in the younger years. And so, kids are great at teaching you because they don't just listen to what you say, they copy what you do. And so if you want to be a great parent, you've got to kind of focus on yourself and be good at being a human, right? And I think, that is a gift that kids give you. It's that perspective for you to then act on to evolve. So I'd say that, I think having kids has helped me do a lot of introspective work. Working with other kids and trying to solve their problems has helped me do a lot of inner work. And then entrepreneurship as well, which is just like extreme self-discovery. Do you know what I mean? It's when you start a business, you really put yourself out there to be criticized, to be rejected. You have to do 10 times the amount of work, often for 10 times less the reward that someone who's employed would get, right? So there's a lot of risk. And I think with that extreme personal development comes a lot of understanding of yourself.
And a lot of people typically wait for that crisis point before being introspective or figuring out what it is they need. I mean, that was kind of my track record, right? It was living in this state of extreme stress actually from a kid, and I didn't even know it until I got to the point where I was completely burned out and kind of everything come and kind of caught up with me. And it was only at that point of burnout where I was like, okay, what's going on here? I'm the one that's supposed to know about health and well-being. I've been in this space forever. Like, what's missing? There was self-awareness piece, but there was also the emotional awareness and like mental health and understanding the impacts there. And what I'm seeing as this real common pattern across the board is that a lot of people wait till that stress point, that crisis point, then they kind of pick themselves back up, they learn all this stuff, then they dive headfirst into something, typically, like you said, entrepreneurship, right, or into the next role in their job. Especially when there's promotions come at more senior levels and it's like all or nothing, parenthood being the same. And then it's like, how do I sustain this? And this is the sticking point which I'm noticing a lot of people get into. It's like they want to sustain it and then they want to then pay forward all the things they've learned in whatever unique way it is for them. But like that's the sticking point. So talk to me about have you ever experienced any sticking points, first of all, where you've felt like you've hit a ceiling?
Yeah, I think you mean specifically with pressure.
Yeah, pressure, stress,
Pressure, stress.
crisis.
Yeah, I think the body starts to shut down gradually.
Mm,
Well, sometimes less gradually, more
yeah.
abruptly, right? When you reach that point, I find that I'll push myself so far that my body starts to respond. I start to get sick, or I start to get like a niggling pain or injured. Injuries start cropping up, and it's normally when I've got 3 or 4 things going on in my life at the same time,
Mm,
right? Like I'll be doing a cut, trying to drop body fat, and really pushing my training and training 2 hours a day and doing 30,000 steps a day. At the same time, I'm trying to launch a new academy in Dubai, and it's there's loads of work going into that and loads of financial pressure going into that. At the same time, I've got a newborn at home who's keeping me up all night and selfishly, and all this sort of stuff, right? And it's when all these things come at once,
yeah.
that's when I seem to have the kind of biggest reaction to it. And so the glass ceiling there, I think, is having that self-awareness that you can't do everything at once. You can do everything,
Mm,
but it's not all at once.
yeah.
And sometimes that needs accountability.
Yeah.
And one of the things I say to people so often in this situation, because a lot of the time people know what to do and they know why they've got certain issues, right? Or why when they're close to burnout.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always ask people when I find they're in that spot is I say to them, if you were mentoring someone just like you right now, what would you say to them? And it's really interesting because we can give advice, but we can't give it to ourselves. This is why accountability is so powerful, right?
Yeah.
Because the answer is, look, you need to prioritize. You've got 3 things going on right now.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the most important thing? Well, probably making sure that you're staying up for your child because they're a newborn,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. Okay, you've committed financially to a massive project in Dubai. There are a lot of people relying on this right now.
Yeah.
Okay, do you need to get shredded over the next 3 weeks? Probably not. So is now the right time for that? Maybe not. Okay, if you remove that, you can bring your diet back up. You've got more energy, sleep will improve, and so on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's remove that, wait a little bit, and then you reprioritize. So I think sometimes giving advice to yourself is a really difficult thing to do, but you can kind of pretend to give it to someone else, and that's a good way of creating that kind of invisible dialogue which helps mentor you. But yeah, in terms of the plateaus I face, it's typically a breakdown in sleep, niggling injuries, this sort of stuff, and then it's just that awareness of it's time to dial back on something.
Yep.
And just being ruthlessly prioritizing what that thing is going to be.
You talk a lot about prioritising, and you were talked about that a lot actually over the last week that we just spent together, which we'll dive into shortly. But you seem to be really good at that. Is that something that's always been the case, or is that something like a skill that you've had to learn over time?
Prioritizing, is it a skill? I think both, maybe. I think actually no, I don't think I've always been good at prioritizing. I think I used to just do everything all the time. I think I've become better at prioritizing because of how bad I was at prioritizing, if that makes sense. I feel like I've not prioritized things enough, and done too many things at once, and then created problems for myself. And because of that, I got distracted, whatever it is, right? And one great example of entrepreneurs who are listening to this, we come up with a great idea, and we build a business, it reaches the first glass ceiling, right? So a good example for me is I built a business in the UK, it was doing really well, we reached about £300,000 turnover a year. I was finally kind of removing myself, and then the business stopped growing. And I had basically outsourced everything, so I wasn't making much money myself, but I was now having a business that wasn't growing and I wasn't really benefiting from. And I realized we had reached a geographical plateau. But until I realized that, I was like, I'm doing everything I can. It's not really growing. Let's start something else. So I started a property business, started doing property courses, which I felt were kind of soulless, didn't really have the same human impact as the developing children's character and saving them from bullying that I was doing, right? And so I needed to break through a certain plateau. So when I went back into it, it was geographical plateau. So that's when we moved to Dubai. Moved to Dubai, built the business up very, very quickly. Then COVID shut us down. So actually, when we relaunched, the plateau we had was we were in after school clubs. So from a branding and offering plateau, we had to quickly go into having our own commercial space. So we quickly grew to 10, 15, 20 commercial units around the UAE. Then we reached a new plateau, which is a cultural plateau. And that cultural plateau was, we've got 25 staff. We grew very, very quickly from 200 students to 1,000 students. And in our haste, we onboarded some of the wrong people. They were great martial artists, but they weren't good mentors or team players. And so, the business kind of stalled because of these kind of toxic individuals in the company. So what we needed was an amazing manager to come on board who had way more experience managing people than me and was able to remove the wrong people, hire the right people. We broke that plateau and then we grew again. And so this series of getting to a problem, a glass ceiling, sitting with the problem long enough, overcoming your boredom with the problem, not getting distracted, as Hormozy says, the lady in the red dress, right? You seen The Matrix? Yeah. So the classic lady in the red dress is, lady in the red dress walks past and you suddenly forget about what you're meant to be doing and you're looking at her rather than focusing on the thing. And the reality then is, but when I just started to realize every single time I reach a glass ceiling, I've just got to sit there long enough, understand that each ceiling requires a different type of leverage, right? Whether it's skills, experience, knowledge, finance, whatever it is, right? So once you acquire that leverage, you then break through and you get to the next one. And so for me, I think growing a business taught me how to understand what to do when you get to these stages and how to break through them, how to prioritize and not get distracted, right? And so that's the key thing, sitting with it long enough when you do feel like you should be doing something else.
So many ways I want to go with that. But for context as to what you actually do with your businesses, we've recorded a podcast back in 2022 and we spoke a lot about the work you're doing with kids through the Warrior Academy, which is actually the name of your business, which I don't think we've mentioned yet. And we talk about building the concentration, conduct and confidence with the kids, and that episode really kind of dives deep on that and exactly what you're building and the kind of the model you've created that pays that forward. So anyone listening, go ahead and check that out. But talking about prioritizing, when we had that conversation about the podcast 2022, this was when the Bates Foundation was on the horizon. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Bates Foundation, when did the Bates Foundation start and how did it evolve, right? So the Warrior Academy is a martial arts organization that's been going on now 15 years, started in the villages of Somerset where I grew up. First club, we had 20 kids in a primary school where there were only 100 kids in the school. We started to make a massive impact there, quickly grew it across the Southwest to 500 students. That evolved into the Warrior Academy in the UAE, which became the largest martial arts academy in the Middle East, with over 2,000 students and 4 academies here. That's the Warrior Academy. What we do is we radically transform the character of young people by developing their confidence, conduct, concentration, using the 4-step warrior method, which is in the bestseller. So that's what we do. In terms of how the Bates Foundation links into it, this is where it's really interesting. So the Bates Foundation, the seeds were planted long ago. About 7 years ago, I was on the same course that you've done with Dent. And I was sat down with a group and there were about 200 people in the room and we had to learn how to pitch. And one of the ways they teach you how to pitch your idea is name, same, fame, goal, and game, right? So without getting into all of that, game, the last bit is, what is your big vision? How do you want to impact the world? So I sat there thinking, what am I supposed to say that's going to be, impressive? And I was a martial arts instructor with 400 students, and 10, 15 clubs, team of 5 in Somerset. And I thought, what sounds really impressive and what would be an amazing thing to do, which felt like I really connected with it, was growing the Warrior Academy to be able to sponsor 10,000 kids around the world, from orphanages primarily. And so I stood up and I read that off the piece of paper and I felt really good about it because it felt like a big vision. And then I thought, right, where do I actually start to do that? To actually afford to do that was something like 5 to 10 times the profit we were making as a business, right? And that would just be the philanthropy aspect of giving this away for free. So I decided to start small and say to our team, look, we can't afford to donate money. We just don't have the money. What we can afford to do is give 10% of our places to children who need it the most. And so the birth of the Bates Foundation, if you like, or the foundation of it, was in the Warrior Academy, where we would give children who were referred to us by welfare officers who are going through financial hardship, separation. It was in a military area, so we partnered with the armed forces. So if they were going away for 6 months, we could mentor their kids because that causes a lot of issues, separation anxiety and so on. And we were partnering with children's hospices, one in particular called Julia's House. And we would mentor the kids' siblings who were terminally ill. So you imagine you're a parent, you've got 2 kids, One of them is terminally ill. They're in a hospice. They've probably got 6 months left. The other one, you still need to give them all the love, care, and attention that you can, but all of your attention goes on the child that you're about to lose. And that is the harsh reality. That child, the other child, still goes through everything. But now they have to deal with doing it all alone. They have to deal with the loss of their sibling and often the loss of their parents because they don't get that same connection with their parents. The parents go through so much trauma, it's so difficult for the sibling. So that's what we did. We mentored them and we made a massive impact. And it just literally, lit a fire in the hearts of our team. It was so inspiring to watch. All of our staff weren't just turning up to get a paycheck. They were turning up because they knew that if they grew the business, then they could give, by 9 students, they could give 1 student this amazing opportunity. We never advertised it because I thought if we advertise it, then we'll just get so many people requesting to do it. So it was this secret Cobra meeting going on every week within the Warrior Academy that we never told anyone about, but we just loved doing. It was like, okay, Seb, Mrs. Smith, here's the situation. Shall we give her a free? I was like, yep, up to you. Yep. Our team would make these decisions on their own. And it was really a very inspiring project. When we moved to Dubai, loads of affluent families who could afford the membership, that wasn't an issue. How could we expand and develop that feeling of impact for the business? How could we actually grow it and make everyone feel that they were making a bigger impact? And how could we teach our students in the UAE that they can make a global impact, that they can and should impact the world for good from the opportunities that are abundantly available to them? How can we do that, right? And so the way in which we decided to do that was not just focus on the UK, because all of our students were from around the world now, we're a global organization, but in fact, focus on the poorest areas on the planet. So we started looking and reaching out to the biggest slums on the planet, some of the most rural areas on the planet, developing countries where kids live way under the poverty line, where they don't get, they get 1 meal a day if they're lucky, sometimes several days without meals. Homeless kids in the slums, all sorts of stuff, right? So we started reaching out. And that's when I went to Nairobi. I went to a place called Tika, where you've been. Yep. And I visited the Tika homeless shelter. I sat there with 30 boys, and they were all off the streets in the last month or 2. They were addicted to glue. They were in gangs. They were running away from authority. They were running away from abusive homes. Many of them were starving. They were suffering with malnutrition, and they were in this club. And I remember sat there thinking, how on earth can I actually help them with a martial arts program? What an unlikely thing to solve the problems they've got, these huge systemic issues, right?
In that moment, when you're there in Thika, what was that feeling that shifted your gears? Because you was obviously already in a space where you were giving back, you were feeling that fire in you to go bigger, impact more people. But what was it about that moment that made you think, yeah, this is the point of no return, as I've heard you call it?
Yeah, so I call that the point of no return, because I sat there on a wooden chair, not as nice as this chair, and I was in a converted pigsty looking at these boys, and there was one little boy called Jeremy, and he came up and he taught the class, and he was really brave, and he did that, and I gave him a uniform as a congratulations for doing it, and his face lit up, and I just watched him put this uniform on. And suddenly his posture was different. He stood more proud. And then he did another leadership drill and everything changed. And I realized this is the second set of clothes he's ever owned. He wasn't just wearing a new set of clothes. He was wearing a new identity. And the reality with these boys in particular is it's not a lack of opportunity, because they do get the chance to be saved from the streets and put into full-time education. The problem they've got is they make the wrong decisions when they do. They run away from authority because they're terrified of it. They are dealing with abuse and trauma, so they don't know how to ask for help. They are in a situation where they kind of want to go back to the streets. It could be because of the gangs they're affiliated with or the addiction issues they've had as well. And so what I realized is in that situation, it's not so much what the uniform gives them, it's the decisions they make by becoming a martial artist. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, these kids don't need a hand out, they need a hand up. Yeah. And the great thing about that was character development is likely the only thing that can influence their decisions. If I give him loads of food, they're fed, they no longer got malnutrition.
Yep.
That helps their basic needs, but it doesn't necessarily change the direction and course of their life.
Yep.
But I know that character development does. I know that over the last 15 years, or in that point, it was the last 8 years or 10 years, we had saved children from suicide who were facing severe chronic depression. And we had parents writing in saying we literally saved their child's life. We had faced kids from chronic bullying. We had faced kids from crippling anxiety. We had transformed the opportunities a lot of kids had and given them leadership roles within an organization. And the reality there was that was all possible because of character development, because of the way that we go in and we literally change the way they see themselves and the world they're in. And if we can do that with kids around the world, all kids, I believe, are fundamentally the same. We can do that with slum kids, homeless kids, whatever it is. Yeah. And so I became really passionate then and there on the spot. This kind of feeling of imposter syndrome, which I had, was replaced with, I've got to do this. I can't just not do this. Yeah. Right. And so that was the point of no return for me. I didn't quite know how to do it. Right. I was like, okay, we're going to expand into all these, how am I going to manage this? How am I going to quality control? How am I going to safeguard these kids? But if you just start and figure it out as you go, as a lot of entrepreneurs who are watching this will get, you figure out the answers quite quickly because we're creative problem solvers, right? So that was the energy from that moment.
That's one of the things I love about you is like, you're a role model for somebody that actually goes and does it, which gives other people the confidence to do it as well. Because I think, and I felt this for sure, it's like you can feel very helpless in those moments. But in those moments as well, those kids are a shining example as well of what's possible. Tika, it was pretty much this time last week, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We were there at these shelters. And there was a young lad called Lusty. He wasn't quite an instructor yet. He was about 14. And he had this other young lad with him. And he was telling me that how when he first went to the shelter, he had one of those stories that you just described, like completely lost touch with his whole family. He got into the wrong crowd, wasn't eating. He was like doing everything he possibly could to find food. But yet when he was there, he was like full of energy, which shows that he actually has energy now as well. He's being fed and he's being looked after. But he had this other young lad with him. His name was Victor, and he was probably about 5 years younger. And this lad just followed him everywhere. And you could see that he clearly looked up to him. He felt safe with him. And it was just this, that was like one of the first centres that we went to. And there was definitely a lot more to come after that, many, many stories like that. But this young lad, and just that relationship they built, I think that said it all, because it was the character development piece that would have allowed him to be that role model and to be like a leader for that kid. So it was really inspiring to see in so many ways. There'll be people listening to this, though, that maybe think, well, we know there's problems in the world. We know there's things that are happening, perhaps overseas, not on our doorstep, especially in Dubai. Some things not as obvious. There's obviously some real significant issues here in the Middle East at the moment, which is causing a lot of heartache for a lot of people. How do you shift that energy into action? You talk a lot about purpose energy. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think everyone does this slightly differently. I think for me, personally, I put myself in situations which are quite uncomfortable, and then I figure out what to do on the way down. And it's a little bit like base jumping, right? You have a rough idea of what you're going to do, hopefully a decent idea before you do it. You climb up the cliff, you stand on the edge, you lean forward, and then you jump. And the reality is you've got to pull that parachute before you hit the ground. And in almost every case, you do that successfully, right? All the 500 jumps I've done have been a success, I guess.
except the one we spoke about in the last podcast.
Even then, the parachute opened. So you can watch that podcast if you're curious what happens when your parachute hits the ground quite fast. But in that situation, you force yourself into what I call the high performance zone, right? So if you look at the comfort zone, a lot of people say comfort zone, and then you leave your comfort zone, that's it. That's where the good stuff happens. You've seen that kind of classic diagram, right? Yeah. But it's not quite as simple as that. You've got the comfort zone, then you've got the high performance zone, then you've got the hyper anxiety stage. And the reality is you want to leave your comfort zone into this high performance zone, where you're doing something that's outside of your comfort zone, makes you feel uncomfortable, but you can probably achieve. Yep. If you go too far, you go past that zone into the hyper anxiety stage where you're doing something outside of your comfort zone which you can't achieve. Yep. And so the reality is, I think if you want to grow and develop, and we teach our students this and our team this all the time, you've got to frequently go into this high performance zone. And the beauty of doing that so frequently is you start to trust yourself. Yep. And so as a result of that, you actually put yourself in more of these situations. And so one of the things we really focus on is courage over confidence. We actually say courage earns confidence. And so for me, it's really important that we celebrate and we encourage and we put that focus and energy on showing courage. If we can show courage, confidence happens as a byproduct, right? And for me personally, I love to be surrounded by people who have courage because I feel like it's contagious. Just like scarcity mindset or anxiety is contagious. Like if you are really nervous right now, I might be like, oh God, I'm starting to feel a bit nervous, but you're not. And so as a result of that, everyone feels like they can achieve this. Everyone feels calmer. Everyone feels like they want to get this done and move forward. And I think that for me comes from A, being from a military family and being in the military myself when I was younger. B, being a martial artist all my life and having to jump in the ring all the time and compete around the world and see extreme sports, right? You don't just stand on the edge of a cliff really nervous with your legs shaking and do a successful jump. You have to learn how to be calm and how to give everyone around you that sense of calm, that kind of calm, courageous leadership, which I really aspire to do. And so I think courage is the really important thing, right? What's the energy you've got when you go into this thing, when you go into a slum and you don't know how to solve the problems, but you're having the courage to go there, not have the answers, but to listen more than you speak and to be open to think creatively about how you're going to solve it. And so I think one of the big shifts for me is I would go to a slum in the past and be like, I want to teach you martial arts. It's going to change your life. Yes, it is. And all those things are great. But now I go into a slum and I speak to the locals and I just listen. And I try to listen more than I speak to them. And then I very, very quickly action the things they tell me. And for a lot of them who are used to charities coming along and having long chats, which take months, they're very surprised by the amount of action we take. Even recently, in one of the slum schools we visited, it's quite a funny story there.
There's a lot of stories, and I want you to jump into some of them shortly. But one of the things I want to pick up on that you just mentioned was around that courage being contagious, because we've touched upon that. Obviously, we've been together in Kenya with 15 other patrons this last week, and it was our first time being exposed to such poverty and such issues that these kids were facing. Not just the kids, the parents as well. And it's actually quite devastating when you look at the extremes. And it was a shock for all of us. And I think I don't think we was in our comfort zone, but we were definitely flying in and out of that anxiety state that you've mentioned. And I think there was a lot of emotion attached to it. So I think there's a lot to be said for the community that you've now created with the patrons. So you've not only have you done it for yourself, your family, the people in your team, all of the kids you've mentored through Warrior Academy, you're now extending that reach even further, not only to the kids in the slums, but also to other people who are potentially in positions where they can also be change makers in their own way. And I just think that's something that I don't want to skip over, because I think that's very rare. And my hope of bringing you on the podcast for obviously sharing all of your wisdom, obviously, Seb, but also is to show other people like that it's possible to lead that way as well. And because I think that there's a big opportunity we have right now, because there is a lot of chaos in the world. There's no getting away from it. But the way you are able to shift gears so quickly and bring everybody else along for the ride is just something really, really special. So thank you for that. But also, how do we continue that ripple effect with other people that we know and people that are listening to this podcast that are like, I want a taste of that. I want to be that person.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the first thing is this warrior method, right? Which just seems to show itself again and again and again, time and time again throughout my life. And I read a book called The Warrior Method 2017. And the more I look back on this book, the more I just see it popping up and being relevant. And those 4 steps are community, inspire, challenge, lead. And so the first thing, if you look at the community side, is you have to build this safe and supportive community that people trust. And you've got to have this element of trust and understanding and empathy going on, right? Where people feel like they're seen and heard, and there's space for everyone to experience their emotions and just feel connected, and this sense of unity. We do that with our clubs, we do that with our classes, we do it with the patrons program. Yeah. So when you look at that, you've got that community aspect, right? Yeah. The next thing is inspiration. We've got to be able to inspire people. You've got to make people feel inspired. Yeah. Lots of ways you can do that. You can do it through language. You can do it through making documentaries. You can do it through content. You can do it through putting yourself out there and showing an example of what, that actually looks like. So the once you've got a community that feels safe, supported, and a sense of belonging, and they're inspired, you can then start to challenge them. And so this recent trip was the perfect example of challenging the community, right? Those who came along hadn't been challenged by the Bates Foundation yet. This was now the first challenge, right? And so what I loved about the Patreon community is I was taking a lot of people outside of their comfort zone for the first time, going deep into one of Africa's biggest slums. Extreme poverty, looking at kids with severe malnutrition. You're going deep into slums where, people are sharing beds. These kids are having one meal every day or every other day if they're lucky. The stories they hear are heartbreaking. It's incredibly uncomfortable because it highlights the sheer contrast and abundance that a lot of our patrons have. And for those who have kids as well, you start to have this feeling of, this is so unfair. My kids have this as a birthright compared to other kids around the world. And so with that comes all these feelings, mixed emotions of shame and guilt and so on, right? Now, that's the courage aspect, forcing them into challenging themselves, which wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the community and inspiration, right? So community, inspire, challenge. The next thing is lead. Once you've experienced these things, you've gone through this entire cycle. And one of the things I say to you, and I said to all the patrons, is perspective is useless without implementation. Arguably, it's selfish. If you go and do this incredible thing abroad and you witness the sheer contrast in your life and the abundance you have, the poverty you then experience, and you go home thinking, I've had, what a great perspective I've now got. I feel so grateful. This is amazing. Those kids who have benefited from you, of course, because of your donation, but for other people who might not have donated, they've given you this gift of perspective. And you're now using that energy to just feel better. It's not enough. What you need to do is lead a change. You need to lead the movement, carry on the movement within your own circle, within your own communities, within your kids, within whatever it is, right? And so, if you don't take action on those things, it just becomes selfish. And so for me, it's, the best way to approach that is implementing the Warrior Method: community, inspire, challenge, lead.
So well articulated. And I've been on the receiving end of that with you, and in many other ways in my life, and I'm very grateful to have been. But I can really relate to what you said, obviously, about the different cocktail of emotions and the contrast. I said to you before we started recording, I come back from the trip and I had a nice soak in the bath, and I was in the bath and I was like, how much water is in the bath? Oh my God.
I shouldn't be allowed a bath.
Yeah.
There are people out there without baths.
Not without baths, but water to drink.
Yeah.
And I was just like, whoa, like, what is this about? And how can we embed that more and more into our business? And there'll be some announcement coming soon, and podcast listeners will learn more about that over time, the type where we're putting our energy and our focus now, because that's something I've definitely learned from you, is like, you have to double down on one thing. I knew that, but going there, it's like, well, now there's no other option. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a point of no return, isn't it? It's like this realization, but it's the action piece that's necessary. Because I think it's easy for people to watch like the Instagram stories and things like that and to be like, oh, it's just, somebody's, gone on holiday and doing a bit of a good world tour. And actually it's so much more than that. And like you said, if we don't turn it into action, you're almost capitalizing on it for your own gain. And that's not okay, right? We have a responsibility to do something with it. So Seb, tell us a little bit more about some of these like turnaround moments where you've been like, wow, this is a problem I didn't know about. And then suddenly tomorrow, not necessarily problem fully solved, but at least another step closer towards it.
Yeah, this is probably the most heartbreaking and exciting thing that you can experience in building a charity, if I'm honest. And this is like the kind of epitome of mixed emotions, right? When you build a charity, the hardest thing, and I read about this today, the hardest thing is prioritizing. And so you go in thinking you're going to solve this problem, right? And very quickly you realize that there are an abundance of severe issues which are vital and you need to solve them. A great example of that is I sat down with a little girl, about 9 years old, in an orphanage in Nakuru in the north of Kenya. And she was telling me that it's real. I said, what's the hardest thing about your day? She said that it's really cold to get to school. And you might think, okay, she's got to get to school and she's got one set of clothes, shorts and a t-shirt, an old school uniform, and it's, under 10 degrees, freezing. 90-minute walk. Okay, so why don't we put all of our budget onto providing clothes? Well, in doing that, in your haste of, trying to solve that problem, you've missed the fact that she's suffering with malnutrition because you haven't spotted the signs. And so now, you're just finding out that she only gets one meal a day, and sometimes during the weekend she doesn't get food. And so you could say, okay, well, she can be a bit cold. Let's give her food. Yeah. Okay, now she's being fed. All your budget's on that. It's not on water. She doesn't get enough clean water every day. She's not hydrated enough. That causes huge issues. Okay, let's focus all our money on water instead because she needs that before she's got food. Yeah. Well, now you're focusing on water. You're not focusing on schooling. Yeah. Okay, so if she's in school, she might be protected. That's great. So let's put all our money on schooling and give her education so she's got better opportunities in life and she can escape the slums, right? Yeah. But now your money's on that. You don't realize that actually this character development program is one of her only shots at the instructors finding out that she's going through abuse at home by a relative, right? Because our instructors in the slums actually act as social care workers as well, because they spot the issues the teachers in big classes don't necessarily see. Yep. And so as you start to go through these problems, you start to realize, there's always something else, there's always something else. And so the hardest thing is realizing that you can't solve every problem effectively. You basically have to choose what you're going to solve. Yeah. And so the way you do that is you don't guess, you ask. And the way you do that is you build an incredible local team who can help you prioritize. You're going in, like I'm going in as a Westerner. I've got an idea of what I want to do to help them, right? And I've been shocked so many times about how there's almost, when you're on a safari in the Serengeti or Masai Mara, right? And you're like, look at this ecosystem of nature and everything links together. Yep. The slums are just like that. There's an ecosystem of problems, and you solve one problem, you might inadvertently create another one. Yep. Or you might solve these two, but then you start to, something else needs help, or the priorities start shifting. Yep. And so what I've realized is by having an amazing local operations manager, we're able to put things in order and say, we're going to solve this first. We're not going to build this bridge up to 90% and then quickly start another one and no one gets to cross the bridge. Yeah. We're going to build this 100% bridge, bang, next bridge, next bridge, next bridge. And we've basically identified, which I'll speak about soon with the patrons, is what I call the 7 game changers within the slums. Yeah. Those game changers are food. They are a character development program, soft skill development program. It's water. It's shoes, because a lot of them don't have shoes. Yeah. And it's period kits for girls, because a lot of them go into puberty without knowing what to do. And the reality there is they face all sorts of issues. One of the biggest reasons girls don't go to school is because of the shame or guilt surrounded with their periods, right? And so there are all these different issues that we face. And so the way that I solve that, or I aim to solve that, is we raise money through the Bates Foundation, and then some of it goes directly to these things. And the other thing that we do is we partner with people to solve those specific problems. Yep. So we partner with people who can provide period kits, sanitary kits for girls, and they will provide all of that. They'll solve that problem. One of the hardest things for a lot of people is actually identifying which schools, orphanages, slums to work in, because it's so hard to trust people. Yep. B, it's the actual practical logistics of giving out these kits and actually getting stuff done. Yeah. And C, it's organizing it all together, because you might know how to do it, but then it costs money to actually do it. And so what we can do is we can go to these incredible partners like we've got with Electrolixer, right? They want to do good in the world. Yep. They want to give out kits. They want to give out hydration sachets, but yep. How are they supposed to research and find the right place to do it? How can they interview 20 orphanages to get to the one that isn't corrupt, yep. so they can really help those kids? We know how to do that. We've got 10,000 kids in the slum who need help. And so, it's the beautiful thing now is we're moving into partnerships, and that's where things start to really compound. We're looking for partners in all of these different areas so that we can produce this beautiful package for kids in the slums. And we can say, look, if you're a kid in the slum, you get a life-changing 8-year soft skill development program, which turns you into a black belt. Yeah. You get a meal every single day before you go to class, so you don't suffer malnutrition. Yeah. You get a pair of shoes if you don't have any. Yeah. You get hydration, all this sort of stuff, right? And so for me, that's really exciting. And I think that is That is the way you prioritize. You don't do it alone.
Yeah.
You find the problems, you get local advice, and then you leverage partnerships. Leverage again.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for the partnerships side of it, and I mean, I know when we was giving the electrolytes out from E2 Hydration on this last trip, there's all of the kids want something, and it was like sometimes there's just not enough to give to everyone, and I didn't like that feeling. It was like, well, no, I'm here to give something, and I've got to say no, and it was like, oh, it was heartbreaking. But it's only through this sustained partnerships, right, and the people that are willing to do good in a structured way that is actually going to make a difference over the long term. It's very easy, isn't it, to say, okay, I'm going to give this amount of money and not be really connected to the vision of it. It must be really, really, really challenging for you to pick. I know you've got a great team on the ground that are helping you to prioritise. And there's an example of that, trying to solve one problem and create another one, that you mentioned that stuck with me, which was like giving a kid a new T-shirt or something, but actually on the way home, because of how dangerous it is in the area they live, it's like the kid might get beaten up to take that T-shirt away, and it's like we don't even think about the implications of giving something we see so basic. So it's so necessary to have these protocols really in place. And one of the things that I also love about Bates Foundation is how transparent it's been. I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like your business, Warrior Academy, funds basically the operations of everything when it comes to Bates Foundation. So then any additional donations then go straight to the kids, like directly. Is that the case?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for me, the most important thing was that the patrons knew every single pound went directly to the kids. Yeah. And for years, I've been, donating to various different things, which is great. Even automated donations, so that when someone donated or bought a membership with us, we could give 365 days of life-saving clean water to kids in Africa. And we were doing all this stuff, and it felt really good and sounded really good, but it just felt kind of disconnected. I didn't know those kids. I'd never been there. What was that like? And so I wanted to create this platform when I could have a group of business owners and say, this is actually where we're going, what you're doing, and you can see in real life what's going on, who you're helping. Just extreme connection with the donation to the source. And there are costs involved, and the Warrior Academy absorbs so many costs for the Bates Foundation. I think one day the goal would be that the Bates Foundation is a completely separate entity which kind of grows and develops on its own. But for me personally, I've committed to personally cover the cost of logistics. So the cost of managing it, the cost of operations and so on. This is the kind of behind the scenes cost, which costs $100,000 a year. People don't see, but that's what I personally cover. The donations that we then raise go directly to uniforms for the kids, instructors' salaries. We don't typically send any money to the orphanages or the schools. What we then do, this is to prevent any issues. We actually just pay people after a month of work. We say, look, you've done that month. There's the money for the month you've worked. And I think that's a really clever way of preventing corruption, preventing issues, preventing a new headmaster coming into the school and saying, I'm going to take some of the money and just reduce the salary to the instructors, and hard for us to hear about it. So we've put all these safety measures in place to prevent all the biggest problems that most charities have. A lack of transparency, a lack of connection, and the rise of corruption, where people actually spend, you'll spend £1,000 on a donation in a big charity, and half of it will go to actually fundraising to get you to pay that in the first place. The beautiful thing about the patron program is there is no money spent on marketing or fundraising. This is all just word of mouth. And the really cool thing about that is this is all through referrals. And so, we are growing the patron group, and it's referral only. And we just want people who are like-minded, who are courageous, who are impact-driven to join the team, and who want that connection with what we're actually doing. And so that's basically how we grow, and we solve those big problems.
Some of the patrons were talking one of the nights after one of the more harder days, should we say, and we were just saying, like, where else would you find a community like this of people that are just so like-minded, that genuinely care? And I'm sure they're out there. I hope they are. I mean, the optimist in me is that there's many communities like this. Maybe I've just not been exposed to them so much. But I think because you've come from a very authentic place, and you've led with something that you do know, and something that a concept that you've proven when it comes to the martial arts side of things. And I know it's a lot of people that might think, oh, well, what's martial arts going to do, when they maybe see some of the videos and stuff like that. And actually, like, I mean, I've never really been into martial arts, but I understood the character development piece behind it. But it's so much more than that. It's about everything else that comes with the martial arts. Martial arts, the beautiful thing about that, I think, is how engaged the kids are with it. It's something fun that they can go and do. It's something they can feel a sense of belonging part of doing as well. There was one of the girls we were speaking to, and she said about, her name was Faith, and she said, so she was 14 years old, and I said, what's been, practicing the martial arts, what's it been doing for you? Like, what have you enjoyed? And she said, well, now I know how to defend myself if the enemies come and take me in the night. And I said, what enemies might they be? Does that happen often? She said, yeah, like the enemies that come and took my sister. If they come for me, I know what to do now. And it's like, wow, like, it's unreal. It gives me goosebumps again just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's amazing for me as well. Having done this for so many years, I'm still surprised how powerful martial arts is. And I probably sound biased saying that, but I was standing with a teacher, of a headmistress of a slum school that we had recently just started in St. Martin's. 400 kids there, all from the slum, facing devastating conditions, extreme poverty. And she said to me, you've been here 3 months now. I said, yeah. I said, how's it going? She said, when you first came, I wasn't sure, because martial arts. Like, what do we need martial arts for? Yeah. And then she said, there's magic in this. Like, there's magic in this. And I said, I know. And I said, just wait till they wear the uniform. This is before the uniform, before any of the identity piece starts evolving. And she could see it already. She could see it in the way that the kids were changing, how their emotional regulation was being impacted, how their aspirational role models were starting to form around them because they wanted to become a black belt, all this sort of stuff, and how they started to make different decisions and live their lives differently. Some of the stories that really stuck with me, I was sat with a boy in Stara Rescue Center in Kibera slum, and he was about 9 years old. And he broke down in tears next to me, and he said, I was sniffing glue because I was so hungry. A lot of the kids there would sniff glue. Sometimes even the parents give it to them, because you've got kids who are starving, haven't eaten for days. Parents can't afford to give them food. And the tragic situation is they get addicted to the glue, but it numbs them physically, so they don't feel the pain of hunger. I didn't realize how much starvation causes anxiety, but it's so linked. One of the biggest issues these kids have is extreme anxiety that they're not going to get fed, they're not going to get food, or their families aren't. And he said, I don't feel, even though I'm not necessarily getting more food, because we hadn't launched our food program yet, he said, until that week, he said, I don't feel anxious anymore, because I know how to calm myself down. Because in martial arts, we learn how to calm ourselves down with meditation. What he's basically talking about is emotional regulation. And so you take a boy in the slum who's facing extreme poverty and extreme anxiety because he's starving, and you give him the ability to regulate his emotions, and a community where that's normal. And that is something very unique to martial arts because of the holistic development you have within that. You find that he doesn't start using glue, and he starts to avoid addiction, which means that he's not going into gangs, which means that he's staying in school, which means that he's sticking to the program, which means that he doesn't necessarily go into crime or violence. He avoids prison time, avoids all of the kind of systemic issues. And so that really hit me. I was like, wow, there really is magic in this, even beyond what I thought, right? And it's, sport is incredible for kids. And my whole thing isn't about martial arts. It's about developing the character of young kids, giving them the tools to succeed in life. And if there was a better way of doing it than martial arts, I'd be doing that. But martial arts is just like entrepreneurship. It's extreme self-development. And it's, you're part of a community, so you've got the benefits of a team sport, but you're working yourself. It's individual. And I think for these kids, they get this ownership of, this is me, I'm working myself, I've got something for me. And they carry it with them wherever they go. They don't need anything for that. And I think that's beautiful,
It is beautiful because it's something nobody can ever take away from them. And for some of these kids, a lot has been taken away from them, but that's something they'll be able to live with forever. So that's a really beautiful way that she's put that about there being magic in it, because I felt that magic firsthand, and it's still with me today. So thank you for that. Seb, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that maybe you wish I had, or anything you would like to share with our audience as we wrap up?
I think that if you're watching this and you've got this far, you're probably interested about what we're actually doing, right? What is it like to be a patron? We are a very interesting group of creative, impact-driven individuals who run businesses. There are people in our group who have run businesses for a few years, and there are some in our group who are, close to billionaires who have exited their business for tens of millions, right? it's quite a quirky group of people, I would say. They're all very different, but they're all very aligned with what they do. We're looking for more patrons. You need to be referred. You need to know one of the patrons to get in. And the big promise that we give our patrons is we'll change the way you look at yourself and the world that you live in. It's a 3-year minimum, 3-year commitment. It's an adventure. The beautiful thing about the patron program is it's this fusion of impact and adventure. Yep. So we'll take you to the heart of some of the most challenging areas on the planet, in India, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, in Kenya, all over the world, where you'll see the impact of your donation. So that's the impact piece. Yep. And then there's the adventure piece. While we're in these incredible locations, you'll start to feel the adventure that some of these places have to provide, right? So big, long hikes in the Himalayas, or you'll visit some exciting places in Africa that you never would have visited if you didn't go there. And so we want to try and give people this balanced view of, this is Africa. Yes, there's extreme poverty there, but we also want to show you how beautiful this country is, the amazing nature and wildlife and so on. And part of the reason for that adventure piece, which I think makes this charity very unique, is that it creates this tighter bond. Yep. And if you look at community, inspire, challenge, lead, the community aspect is we need to have these shared experiences. So we put our patrons through an emotional roller coaster. Charlotte's been
that's an understatement.
And as a result of that emotional roller coaster, over 3 years, we fulfill that promise, I believe, of changing the way you look at yourself and the world that you live in.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely over-delivering on that for sure. You're sticking to your promise, no doubt. It's been 2 years now, I think.
2 years, first trip. I think everyone's mind is blown.
Completely.
We're just getting started.
Yeah, exactly. So anybody that is interested in learning more about the Bates Foundation, there will be all the links in the show notes for this as well, and just reach out direct and we'll take the conversation further. Seb, thank you so much. I mean, this whole season is about the link between stress, performance and impact. And I think you're a shining example for all three of those things in a healthy way, which I love. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everything you're up to in the world. I've said this before and I'll say it again, you're one of a kind and I appreciate you so much.
Quick one, as our long-term audience, you will know that our show has grown a lot over the years, and we're thrilled to share with you that we have our very first sponsor. But please don't worry, we're not going to suddenly bombard you with loads of ads. We just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to Meals on Me, who's not only sponsoring us, but they're also fueling us. Meals on Me is a food, meal prep and delivery service who understands that wellness isn't about shortcuts. It's about choosing better every single day. They keep it real with fresh, wholesome meals that fit into your life. For me, when I'm rushing through the day and pushing my limits, Meals on Me powers me on. And the best bit that I find is that there's so much variety and every meal tastes amazing, especially compared to others that we've used in the past. So good nutrition underpins our ability to cope with stress and perform at our highest levels. But it's often an area where most of our clients will struggle. So Meals on Me make it easy, effortless and enjoyable. So check them out today. A special link for you is in the show notes. Thank you to them and thank you to you.